Hi, I'm Rob.
Hello, I'm Dave.
We've got the same dad.
But we didn't meet until I was about 30.
Which means we've got a hell of a lot of listening to catch up on.
Eons.
So this is the podcast where
we share an album that
your
brother should know.
We've done better.
We have, but it'll do.
Good morning, evening, or afternoon, listeners. We're here today to talk about Fetch the Bolt Cutters by Fiona Apple, an album that I'm very excited to share with my dear, long, and somewhat lost brother. When we first proposed this podcast, it was one that was already on my list. It's only 3.5 years old as we discuss it, but I feel like it's already gone down as something of a modern classic, and it's certainly an album that's been talked about and a lot of people have found a lot of solace in, and I personally have returned to time and time again over the past 44 months or whatever it's been. I can't wait to hear Dave's reaction. Everything tells me this is one that he's going to love because everything about it is what I feel that we've got to bond over when we discuss music. Personal lyrics, irreverence, just a complete tearing up idiosyncrasy of the rule book. Surely this is something you adored, Dave.
Oh dear. I couldn't get on with it. And I spent the last
kidding.
really couldn't out of the we've done, you presented 3. Now this is the 4th. This is by a long way under the pile of those. And that's a real shame, I know, and I found myself, I've spent more time working out why it is that I don't like it than probably listening to it. Well, because I found listening to it just not a very rewarding experience. But I spent a long time just trying to get my head round how it is that every reviewer has given it 10 stars. The internet.
I mean, 9.5 here and there.
Yeah, but the internet is full of people telling me that this is something that means a huge amount to them, that they've connected with, that has empowered them, all of those, which is great and brilliant. But I couldn't get hold of it for a moment. I actually found it really difficult to listen to. So I don't know where you want to start with that.
Well, I'm frankly quite flabbergasted, and I can't pretend I'm a little bit disappointed. But I do think you've hit onto a very personal point there. Yeah, this album arrived at what I wouldn't want to call an opportune moment, but it did arrive at a certain moment in history.
Sure.
And I do think a lot of people jumped on the title track, Fetch the Bolt Cutters, right? Mm-hmm. And it dropped in April 2020 when we were all stuck at home. Mm-hmm. And this claustrophobic sense that the music and the lyric conjures, it was a record that a message rather, that a lot of people could jump on. But I also think it's a record that was maybe suited to that moment in time because it's one that rewards repeated listening. And I'm sorry your own repeated listening didn't delve more, but I think this was a relatively mainstream release that was completely left field from what everyone would expect from even a relatively left field artist at that point in their career. But people had time to really absorb it. And yeah, there was also a lot of socio-political issues that were, sadly quite prevalent in our culture that it did address at a time when the popular consciousness was certainly addressing them as well. And that may have been, part of it. But I think capturing the zeitgeist is, which to me, no part of me thinks that this was in any way cynical or a considered manipulation of events. I feel that these are very, very honest songs that happen to arise at a moment when people had time to listen to them, and it happened to tap into a lot of important issues that society was grappling with. But that's only one reason why this is a great album, and that's what I want to talk to you more about. Because I think that, yes, there are some themes here that had a certain prescience in 2020 and sadly still today. But I also think that the music itself is so spellbindingly, it's rule breaking. I mean, so many rules are not just bent and broke; they're twisted in and out like spaghetti. It's a real cataclysm of ideas presented in what seems like a completely honest but thrilling way. I find the music I'd say, throughout at least 3/4 of the album, unlike anything I've heard before, and thrilling as a result of it. And that all comes coupled with these deeply, seemingly honest, I can only imagine, quite personal lyrics that are always very arresting and always saying something. And one thing that I really touched on, listening to it repeatedly in the last week or two, preparing for this, was, I think in nearly every case, if it may perhaps with one or two exceptions, whether the lyrics are all seemingly addressed at a particular individual, presumably an individual that exists in real life, but not necessarily so. But that intimacy is, to me, something that isn't used in songwriting that much, and when it is, it's very easy to alienate a listener. In this case, it's gripping every time. You might be, arrested, seduced, surprised, provoked, even turned on, whatever, but she's addressing someone, and it's not really you, but you're living, it's a verbal assault on you that paradoxically just flips the whole thing round so you're in her shoes. And it's a great device. It's just so hard to get right. And I feel like that gaze that she projects, it's almost like she's taken all the kind of attention, all the negative energy that's been projected on her as an artist, as a female, as someone that's suffered with a lot of mental health and other issues. And she's projecting that gaze straight back with a real power, real authority, but also a knowing vulnerability. And it's just completely compelling. And yes, at times it's very ugly to hear, and sometimes it's joyous to hear. And that's the whole journey of this record. And I think it crams so much into such a short space of time. And it's the opposite of navel gazing as a result, because it's, rather than dwelling on any of these negative emotions that we've heard so many songwriters do before, she's throwing them straight back at what in most cases is the source of these feelings.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, if ever we've had two very different reactions to an album. So just to start the top, I actually had to make a little list for myself of the reasons why I couldn't engage in it, and actually it was a list of the reasons it isn't. So to be clear, the subject matter, absolutely, the subject matter, as you said, it's things like identity, sexual abuse, toxic masculinity, kind of female to female solidarity or otherwise. Ultimately all about having the freedom to express your identity as everybody should. And absolutely, to be clear, no problem with the subject matter at all. It needs to be sung about, played about, arted about, and needs to be discussed in our culture, and hopefully our culture can move on in all kinds of ways around the issues that Fiona Apple is dealing with here. So I don't have a problem with the subject matter at all. I also don't have a problem with, as you said, the lyrics being, with the best one in the world, they're insular and very, very there's a lot of I and me and a lot of her own stories. She even name checks friends of hers. Shamika is there, very specific, very personalized details in a way that for me, and clearly I'm just missing a trick here, but for me, didn't have a universality at all. Even, not as a, there's kind of anthemic university. This is not a kind of anthemic thing. It's not Aretha Franklin respect, is it? But it's also, for me, wasn't kind of, I almost had a little bet with myself how long I was able to talk about this without mentioning one of my favorite ever albums, Tori Amos's Boys for Pele, which you can, I'm sure, make similarities around. The difference for me is that Tori Amos's lyrics on Boys for Pele, which is ultimately about sacrificing a number of her exes into a volcano for all kinds of good reasons. The way that she expresses those lyrics, for some reason, I'm able to tie into my own life experiences and feel that they resonate for me. A more simpler example, when Alanis Morissette sang about, on You Ought to Know, that hit from years ago, I'm here to remind you, etc. A song clearly written from the female perspective, but I'm not the only bloke to find that song also a great cathartic experience, because in some way the lyrics kind of come out of the individual story and you're able to find a link to them. I couldn't find a way in to this world. It didn't mean I think it wasn't an important world for Fiona Apple and others, and those things didn't need saying, but for me, I couldn't find an emotional resonance with the lyrics at all. But again, that's not why I couldn't engage in the album.
I think we should discuss that a little bit, though, because that's actually quite fascinating. And I think, if we're going to get to the bottom of this record and why it works, I do think the lyrics, along with the production, are really the most powerful element. My retort to that is, well, let me tell you a story that we may choose to edit out.
Okay.
For a long time, I felt guilty in my teenage years and perhaps my early 20s reading fiction because I felt that in some sense, even though it was deeply enjoyable, it was in some sense a waste of time. It was just something someone made up. I should be reading nonfiction. I should be reading a newspaper. I should be reading a history book. I should be reading something where I will quote unquote learn something. And I had the opportunity to interview the great philosopher and thinker and speaker A.C. Grayling. And he was coming to a literary festival, so I obviously had to go to him. You know, you're a man of a great intellect and heft, and your time is very valuable. Why on earth would you have read these 58 books to judge in this competition? I think he was judging the Booker that year. And he answered so succinctly and so simply, and it was that. It was that the fiction allowed you to inhabit lives and worlds that you could never physically imagine. And it was so blindingly obvious, I can't believe that I hadn't really thought of that answer myself, because that's clearly what I was doing with fiction and why fiction was so valuable to me. And that, my brother, is why this record is so powerful, because unlike You Ought to Know, there's not much in this album that I can immediately relate to, and I'm actually quite thankful for that. But it's certainly allowing me to inhabit a world, a body, a milieu that I never have and never could. And that is precisely why it's exciting.
Well, yes. Like, so just to jump around a little bit, under the table, kick me under the table if you want. So it's absolutely right that everybody should be able to speak up for themselves whenever they want to. And that's brilliant. But for me, a piece of music about, having to go to a dinner party and speak your mind just didn't feel like a particularly resonating anthem for me or something. I was that, I mean, in a world where there's, 25% of the population lives under poverty, and there's half the world is desperately trying to get to the other half of the world because, and people are being tortured in FGM. And I'm not saying, and you say that and you say, oh, well, you're just dismissing his reverence.
Are you really belittling?
No. Well, exactly.
Belittling?
Yeah. What I'm saying is that it's fine. I think it's absolutely brilliant. If people are empowered to speak their truth by that song, that's brilliant. But for me, I was just like, I can't really listen to 3 or 4 minutes of someone saying, I'm going to a dinner party and I'm going to speak my mind. Great. Excellent for you. That isn't really doing anything.
I mean,
for me.
to be fair, it's 3 minutes, 20 seconds, and I think it covers a lot of ground. I think that's, again, one of the highlights of the album. And again, actually, maybe a moment I don't want to say relate to, because there was clearly a gender dynamic at play in this situation she's describing. But sure, we've all been put in situations where we feel uncomfortable and told to shut the fuck up. And perhaps had a domineering partner, parent, teacher, whatever figure that's trying to prevent us from doing that. And I'm not listing a hierarchy of needs, and yes, she's not singing about FGM, she's singing about what she knows. And therefore, that's what makes it instantly relatable. And that's what makes it instantly exciting, because I feel a little bit like I'm hearing about something that genuinely happened. And the story is so compellingly told. I'm instantly on her side. It's an anthem we can all get behind, but it also paints a picture that's so utterly believable that you're in her shoes, you're in that dinner party. I mean, I love that line about the fancy wine won't quell the sizzle my fire or whatever. It's like, yeah, we've been there. Like, you can take me somewhere fancy, bitch, but this is not, I'm not going to shut up and be pretty, like, it's sad that that's a statement that he's making in 2020. But if tens of thousands of people have found this inspiring and related to it, I think that's a sad indictment of our times, but also shows how powerful the message was and how well delivered it was.
No, I totally, this is a really difficult thing to convey, because yes, it's absolutely vitally important that anybody in the entire planet, regardless of status, should be able to speak their mind and speak their truth and have freedom of expression. But it does feel a bit first world to be talking about a scenario where it's about wine quelling your fear and you're going to a dinner party. Well, at least, great.
Sure.
If that's your world and you're being empowered in that world.
No, but let me just say, whereas I would like to just say, first time I heard the opening line, I told you I didn't want to go to this dinner, I was like on board, because we've all been dragged places. Like, I didn't know how the rest of the story went. Like, I told you I didn't want to go to dinner. You're like, this is someone singing about something that is so mundanely real but relatable that I was already pulled in. Sorry if my life is more Larry David than...
Well, yeah, I've got to say, it's just, this is the only song on the album that did this for me, because I think the other albums the subject matter is, if you like, less first world. But that opening line just made me go, oh, I'm just not really interested in your dinner problems, Fiona. I don't care if you want to go to a dinner party or not. The world has bigger fish to fry than that. So, to be clear then, it's not because of the subject matter that I can't get into this album. It's not because actually that subject matter, freedom of expression, yes, but some of the, the fact is this is about a female perspective of often men being awful. And I wouldn't want to pretend to have been on the receiving end of that. So it's not that the subject matter isn't kind of my world, if you like, that I can't get into this album. And it's not because the lyrics are very insular. There are loads and loads of albums that I love that, frankly, I have no, emotional lyrical engagement with at all. One of my favourite songs, Neil Young, Cortez the Killer. I have never been dancing across the water with my galleons and men, but I love the song, right?
That's a macho fairy tale fantasy of BS built around a 4-minute guitar solo. I mean, you couldn't pick a worse example without perhaps referring to Johnny Cash.
Okay, I'll give you another example. Alicia Keys, there's a song called Girlfriend on Songs in A minor. Let's take a completely different example. The Beatles' Taxman, first song off Revolver. People love that album, and that song, but most people aren't sitting there thinking, the biggest problem in my life is the Taxman taking my millions, as millionaire rock stars. But people still love it. And the reason...
I'm gonna disagree there, because what are the two truths in life? Death and taxes. Everyone hates the taxman. However little you earn, you hate the taxman. We don't need you. Okay, I don't think you need to convince our listeners that you've got a soul. Well, maybe you do, but
maybe I do. But okay, take it as given. It is very possible to love music that you're not necessarily, the lyrical content emotionally doesn't necessarily engage you because it's not your world or they're insular or whatever. Ultimately, this is a music album. So ultimately, it's the music that should draw you in. And I do apologize for this because I know it's affected a lot of people and I know a lot of people love the album, but I found the music to be incredibly tame, incredibly uninventive, incredibly basic and unimaginative, dull, simplistic, and not at all what I was expecting from the reviews. But I didn't find the music in any way exciting. I have to turn Ed Sheeran off on the radio because I find it's music for committee, but I would actually prefer to listen to Ed Sheeran than this. It was just kind of the percussive element was very simplistic, and I know she did it at home, and okay, fine, she bangs sorry, that sounds dismissive, she bangs some spoons together at home, but it wasn't very exciting percussion or rhythmic elements. I didn't find any melodies that engaged me. I didn't find much complexity. I found a lot of chanting, stuff that went around in circles that, again, not to bring my kids into it, but they do a lot of making up of chants all the time. It's endearing, but it's not necessarily something I want an album to listen to. And other than that, the music was a lot of just kind of stream of consciousness stuff, but not very thought through melodically, I didn't think. Not, stream of consciousness stuff, like, I don't know, just to be the old bit like Van Morrison's Astral Weeks and Joni Mitchell's Hajira. They're kind of quite stream of consciousness musical, but it's been thought through and it's got some melodies and some engagement musically and some interesting things. And this stuff, I'm sorry, it left me absolutely cold emotionally and intellectually as a piece of music.
I think it's fascinating how we're clearly listening to two completely different pieces of music, because there's no way you're hearing what I'm hearing. I'm hearing music I have never heard before. There's loads going on. I think, there are some songs, I'll grant you, that are reduced to percussive patterns, but there's layers and layers of percussive, inventive percussion that was conjuring something, deep and tribal and primal, which isn't conventionally seen in, California-bred white pop music, frankly. And it's clearly coming from a deep sense of experimentation. And I do love the knowingly amateurish bits, and they were left in for a reason. It does seem like the first time you hear a dog bark, sure, that's like, oh, isn't that exciting? Then you're like, okay, there's a lot of dogs barking. That was clearly semi-deliberate. I get it. Did you have to use the bones of your dead dog? Well, why the hell not? If that's some kind of cathartic experience for you, and let's face it, it's deeply cathartic music. It's not just chanting. Her delivery is very, very rhythmic. It borders on rap at times, and there's a lot of different vocal parts going on, a lot of harmonizing. And I think you're saying that these melodies are simple, but look at the delivery, the way the words and the melodies and the syllables kind of stack up and roll off one another. It's to me very unlike songs, and they certainly don't all do one thing. I think a really good example. Well, okay, well, let's talk about two. Let's first of all talk about Shamika, the first single. I mean, that's a particularly exciting piece of music because it obviously starts with this crazy off-kilter piano arpeggio, and it's worth noting that Fiona Apple is classically trained, and I think that's very evident. And every juncture I get the sense that things are DIY and things are crude and some things are deliberately very, very simplistic or not playing by conventional harmonic rules, but not because she doesn't know the rules, that she's following whatever muse, she's breaking what needs to be broken and delivering music that therefore doesn't just sound like another pop song. But yeah, the best songs on this do develop for a number of different stages, and Shamika's a really good example because it starts with that crazy off-kilter part, and then you get the kind of stop-start kind of chorus, and this kind of walking bit that sounds like it could be like a Fats Waller song or something. And then the bit that really gets me is the breakdown. This ties into the lyrics, and the melody, and the delivery, and the music. It's all intertwined. Oh, and I must just, we're talking about lyrics that can put you in a place. The idea of a kid who's counting the second moving with tallies and has done, 60 lines in a minute is incredible. And it's just that kind of detail that shows you the kind of claustrophobia of school that I could definitely relate to. But yeah, the line like, Tony told me he'd describe me as pissed off, funny and warm. Sebastian said, I'm a good man in a storm. So she sings that in the kind of, the breakdown pre-core bit before the show makes got potential.
She's so pleased with it. She sings it.
Yeah, and then it becomes a refrain where so these things that were once kind of fleeting insults, she then comes to own. Like, yeah, she's pissed off, funny and warm. She's a good man in a storm. And when it's torrential, Shamika said she had potential. To me, I find that really, really, really pretty exciting. If that doesn't do it for you.
It doesn't. I would say if I was asked my highlight of the album, it would be Shamika. But the highlight means it's one of the songs that's all right, but lyrically, I'm very happy that she seems to have found a resolution around some stuff that happened to her at school. But, you at least had Shamika saying you had potential. There's people out there, believe me, bleakly didn't even have a Shamika. I just thought, like, okay, fine, lovely. You're getting rid of some ghosts there from your past.
Isn't that sad though? Also, to be hanging on to one piece of like positive feedback. Again, you're singing about a situation that is intensely relatable, but doing it in such a personal manner. And I think that's when the music's most powerful. And that's when I would argue that for me, at least, this music has the same power as the most personal cathartic albums that I know, and I relate to it in the same way that I do relate to. You mentioned Hijira, sure. Blood on the Tracks. Even Tonight's the Night is when a songwriter has gone so deep into their soul that they're sharing something so personal, but doing it in such a powerfully naked manner that it feels like anyone can relate to it. And I haven't found many singer-songwriters, if any, in the kind of modern age that have touched me in that way. And this record certainly has, at least got close to achieving that level of intimacy.
Well, and what's weird is I totally agree with you about Blood on the Tracks and Tonight's the Night and Hijira, 100%.
I mean, that to me is the album's real strength. Just painting these moments that are so relatable. I love one song that struck me quite hard is drum set towards the end. With that refrain. Why did you take it all away? Why did you not want to try? And obviously I always assumed it was probably about a dude, which is a little bit reductive because not only men play the drums, huh? And that's why I thought it was wonderful when I learned that this was actually about like the drummer and her band. And that really made me question a lot of the lyrics on the album because you can kind of carve it up between those that are addressed at male figures and those who are seemingly addressed often as solidarity of female figures. And obviously there are a couple that are addressed to what appear to be the current or subsequent partners of the songwriter's previous romantic partners. And I find those, again, really effective. I think Newspaper is really quite special, actually. Got any thoughts on that one?
No, this is the problem, I think, in that I got through the first 4 tracks and then genuinely it's been quite hard for me just to distinguish between the relay rack of this Newspaper, Ladies, Heavy Balloon, Cosmonauts for her drum set when I go.
Sounds like you didn't do your homework.
Well, I really tried, Rob. I really, really, really tried. But what I think for all of them is pretty much the same. I was and that's the shame of it, isn't it? I couldn't find the musicality that engaged with me. I found some of those tricksy things like the dogs barking, which was so obviously, cut in afterwards, just a bit annoying. And I found that the trope that she sort of found something that she thought was, a good line, but kind of just, you sort of, boy, she knew it was a good line because she'd carry on repeating it again. So the relay, evil is a relay sport, when the one who's burnt turns to pass the torch. I'd heard that enough times by halfway through the song.
But did you not have to listen to it several times to hear the list of resentments and to hear how legitimate they were and how not? And then the kicker that she doesn't want to engage in this hatred because it will just ultimately put her in the endless race, right? That's the kicker. Like, we're all victim.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's a hate track. It sounds like she's just basically letting out all this angst, and she is, but at the same time, she's kind of taking a step back, going like, I don't want to hate you for being, presenting your life like a fucking propaganda brochure, which is a great line again. So I find that, I think that's a great song. Going back to Newspaper, it's that great one that's like, I wonder what lies he's telling you about me to make sure that we'll never be friends. And it's a shame because you and I didn't get a witness. We're the only ones who know. We were cursed the moment that he kissed us. But then it's followed, and I love this because it's quite a negative kind of like swirling. Again, one of the tribal ones, which, some people have said that all this kind of layered primitive percussion is kind of Tom Waits-iest, which I'm not going to, deny perhaps, but it's one of those. But then it launches straight into Ladies, which is like this kind of lounge, groovy one, which I kind of think is potentially musically the least interesting thing on the album because it's the most conventional by far. And that's why it's really fascinating to learn it's the one that she didn't write the music for. But it serves as a perfect kind of like counterbalance. It's the yin to the yang. It's the sweet after the bitter because it's, it's the kind of what seemingly seems slightly tongue-in-cheek, ladies, that's, basically solidarity. And this whole idea of like, I left that dress there in the closet, don't worry, it never fit me, belonged to another ex, you keep it, all that stuff, which I thought was a bit like Relay. You said all the negative, you've let out that bile of contempt, and you go, no, I don't want to be in that chain of hate. I don't want to keep passing on the torch. I want to be good. And the same thing here, putting a positive spin on it, which I really, really liked. And that kind of sense of like self-awareness of knowing when you've crossed the line feels for me kind of quite powerful. And I think the opening song is another one that I could see how you might find a bit difficult or problematic in some ways because it, in many ways it starts as this kind of quite, got again those warm piano arpeggios, and that's going back to what you said about Tori Amos. She is a classic trained pianist, but actually there's only 3-4 songs where the piano really features. Instead, she's allowed herself to be led by these chants, by this percussion, by these primitive garage band sound collages that have been built up. But this is a very inviting, nice piece of music, and one of the most poppy pieces of music. It kind of welcomes you in, but it's got this kind of like, it rationalizes, it talks about the kind of madness and size of the universe, but then kind of somehow rationalizes not just Fiona Apple's existence in it, but her immediate needs. And then obviously, then kind of comes to that confessional, bang it, bite it, bruise it, and then what sounds like a kind of faux orgiastic close. And all this happens in like an opener. And this is the commercial bit of the album. So yeah, this is pretty challenging, exciting stuff.
So I thought when I first heard I Want You to Love Me opening track, I thought, wow, I'm going to really love this album. I thought, yes, as an opener, I thought this is right up my street and I'm enjoying it. And I'm, first time you hear things, you're sort of just getting your head around the lyrics, aren't you? But I thought, well, there's more to go back to there and find out. So I genuinely, after track one, was very hopeful. Apart from the bit that made me just worry a bit was the last 10, 20 seconds, which I found the sort of screechy waily bit at the end.
Yeah.
Very self-indulgent, and that was a kind of almost a warning shot across the bow for me. And then Jamaica was groovy and all good, and Fetch the Bolt Cutters itself is an all right, laid back, chilled song. And then under the table we've done, but then from there on, and you'll say, I genuinely, I guess the thing that can be thrown at me is, well, I'm just not getting its innovation and it's kind of, it's too out there for me. I don't find it out there. I have a real Emperor's New Clothes thing about this. I don't genuinely, do you think people will be listening to this in 10 years time? I actually Googled on the back of this albums that are critically appraised at the time or thought to be critically brilliant at the time, but then aren't. And what you get is a lot the other way. There's loads of people doing lists of albums that got bombed at the time critically and have turned out to be classics. I couldn't find a list of albums that were absolutely close to the nines at the time, and 10 years later people went, yeah, maybe we were a bit Emperor's New Clothes there. It doesn't seem to exist, but do you think this is going to, and you said at the beginning, right at the beginning, this is of its time. If you just take one thing of it being, an album of, you should be self-expression. You should be yourself. Fantastic. But people are still playing Gloria Gaynor's I Am What I Am, 40 years after the event. I generally don't think they're going to be playing
I
this.
generally think they do. And I think you are overlooking the sonic invention. And I remember the technology that allowed this to happen was been quite liberating. A lot of people have started making music in their bedrooms, and that has been a bit of a trope. Billie Eilish obviously is, took that to the height.
So that thing you said about disintegration, which was it was of its time with the medium, it was too long because they were allowed to, all of that. They could do 72 minutes. I think this really does suffer from a lack of producer or somebody in the room saying, do you know what? No, that's not very interesting. I know you made a song out of it.
I mean, we'll never know. And there could have been producers that would have done fascinating things with this music, but more than likely they would have made it more commodified, more predictable.
Which is really interesting because the word predictable is I find this deeply predictable music.
Well, okay.
That's the
I want you to go away and
yeah.
listen properly to For Her, which I do think is probably certainly the most musically, lyrically, and performance-wise compelling thing. As I understand it, she recorded every single thing. This is all her. It's just her singing and drumming. And it isn't just one simple chant. I counted it moves through 7 different melodies and beats. And the story it paints is apparently based on something she was told by an abuse victim. But it starts this kind of playful, like playground, kind of like look at da 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 da, and it's quite an impressive feat. It's like da 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 da. It's award season. This has already changed 2 or whatever. And it never really repeats anything. It just gets more and more intense, and the mood shifts, and the beat. There's a bit where it very much takes on a hip hop backbeat, like a very primitive 80s kind of early hip hop. That's the award season bit, and then you get the you should know, but you never know where it's at, and then the beat changes, and then that kicks in and becomes a refrain, and that's when it gets darker. And then I think what reaches, I guess, technically the sixth section, where the drum hits and it turns into this kind of barnyard kind of blues swamp kind of confrontation, like guns are pulled. And that's when the kicking line, which I don't know if I want to repeat, comes out. Anyone knows the album comes, and as if we're making sense of how this great crime has taken place. Then it kind of dissolves into these soaring synthy chorus of auto-tune, just repeating "You were so high," as if that's presumably the explanation offered for what's occurred. And all this takes place in the space of 2 minutes and 43 seconds. It's a veritable bohemian rhapsody of ambition recorded by a single person in their bedroom. I think that song alone is worth the asking price and should quash most of your concerns about the lack of ability or lack of invention or lack of ambition, because it's, again, unlike anything I've ever heard in my life before, and it's thrilling musically, it's thrilling emotionally, and I think one thing we've really overlooked is the power of her voice, and it's definitely thrilling it's definitely very arresting in the lyrical content it delivers, and for me that's the holy trinity. There's a lot of music which does one or two of those things. You mentioned Cortez the Killer earlier, one of the most impressive musical performances, and but I don't give a shit about. I find those lyrics a little bit contrived, but no, this does all 3 things, and that happens very rarely in life.
Yeah, she has a really good voice. I get that entirely. I will go and I will redo For Her. Can I ask you a question about the rhythm and the percussion? And because you said earlier on that this you described it as white pop music from California, and it's just different for white pop music from California, and I guess it is. I mean, I know you listen to a lot of jazz. I do, but not to the extent you do. It's not my world, but kind of modern R&B, which, has a huge amount of inventiveness around rhythmic elements of songs and how you play with rhythm. Do you honestly think this is more inventive than stuff you've listened to in jazz or modern R&B, or even, I mean, for my sins, because I have a 12-year-old and it makes me listen to Radio 1, which is in the UK is the commercial radio station. I have to listen to every modern pop tune. And, the production these days for rhythm sections, because it's all, digital and
well, precisely.
And it's incredible it's incredible, the rhythms. But do you honestly think, I'm not, all of the above taken as a whole, do you honestly think the rhythmic element to this album is, well, you obviously do. I guess my thought is that in relation to all of that lot, it really is.
I think you're missing the point. It's not that any single percussive part that's being laid down is in any sense virtuosic. In fact, quite the opposite. And it's not even that the layering of simple polyrhythms over one another has never been done in Western pop music, although it's been done far more sparingly than you might think. I think it's the combination of the DIY aesthetic, the model instrumentation, the layering, the deeply personal claustrophobia of it all. That kind of effect hasn't really been conjured very much. And I think if we're going to point the finger, Tom Waits and Rain Dogs and those mid-80s trio of records, that's definitely something of a precursor and probably an over-influence. Yes, there are far more virtuosically developed syncopated rhythms being played both by live Afrobeat drummers and being developed by beat makers. In fact, all the most exciting beats being produced right now are, of course, produced by beat makers. That's what they do. They sit at a keyboard and conjure beats. This is not what Fiona Apple's doing, and that's why it is inventive and exciting. And I think if you're trying to argue that it's exciting because it's virtuosic, you're missing the point. It's exciting because it's taking elements that are not normally found in pop music, blending them together in a primitive but very instinctive way, and because it all hangs together with the tribal and kind of chanting that we've discussed, and the sheer emotional power of her voice, and again the use of auto-tune. So the idea of using heavily kind of synthesized vocals swirling over these kind of very kind of rattly DIY percussion, it's a combination that hasn't really existed. And then when you throw in the urgency of the messages and the off-kilter delivery of lots of the vocals, and the way that she can think very fast like this and go up and down, or she can hold notes and do all these kind of, I wouldn't say pyrotechnics, because again they sound deliberately the antithesis of being technical for the sake of it, but they clearly come from quite a deep, honest, profound space. And I think the audience can detect that intimacy and can detect that authenticity. And that is what I mean. I don't think it sounds, or is delivered, more importantly, like most pop music. And yes, whilst there have been people on the fringes that may have been experimenting with handmade percussion and chanting or whatnot, for an artist Fiona Apple's stature to take this kind of risk and to pull it off, I do think it's a statement, and frankly, I haven't heard music that sounds anything quite like this.
I can only say that I didn't find that level of innovation. It sounded like, it just sounded like a not very inventive demo tape. But there you go. That's the joy of it, isn't it? So, Rob, clearly I haven't necessarily been grabbed by this. If you were to bring me into Fiona Apple's world more, or somebody else has listened to this and loved it, what else should they listen to?
To be quite honest, I am in no way a Fiona Apple fan. I completely came across this record amid the wave of critical hype and fell for it. Having worked my way back, she's released 4 prior albums over a 24-year period, far from prolific. The first couple came out in quick succession, working with John Bryan, I recall. Many songs written while she was still a teenager in her early 20s. But I think this kind of era of experimentation really began with the predecessor to this record, which has a very long name but begins the Ida wheel, which I think is definitely, it hints at a lot of the invention and certainly the authenticity and the autobiography and everything that makes this album great is definitely present in the Ida wheel. And I think it's also potentially modern classic. So definitely, if you liked this, you would go and listen to the Ida wheel, sure. And I think we just touched on Billie Eilish. To me, if we're looking at self-produced bedroom pop, which of course is not what she's doing anymore, but the first album, which obviously was largely her brother sonic textualizing and then her kind of confessional diary scraps, to me, that was, again, one of the most thrilling albums of the last 5-10 years, and would only be a few places behind Fetch the Bolt Cutters in my estimation. Oh, no, actually, and I've got one more very legit recommendation. An artist who is conventionally a jazz singer, Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, who is incredibly intuitive. She won Grammy or whatever at 23. She's now on the album 5th or 6th. I think she's only in her early 30s, but she's been increasingly delving in to, she started off just singing the standard songbook, but has been delving into more and more of her own composition and exploring exciting things like, 800 years Creole folk songs and all the rest of it. But her last record did feature some short musical interludes that, in fact, she recorded at her home on GarageBand, which are largely auto-tune and synth, and really show her developing her own voice as kind of like an indie art singer to a certain extent.
Fantastic. So, thank you, Rob, for introducing me to Fetch the Bolt Cutters. An album I probably should know, but I honestly don't think I will be able to listen to again, but I will go and listen to for her.
So I guess none of this is going to make it onto the hipster Hot Daddy Barbecue playlist.
Really not. Really.
Not even Shamika? Not even ladies. I do think.
Oh, we didn't get into that.
That will go down well.
Really, once you've repeated the same word 16 times, really.
So, Dave, I'm really sorry. Slightly disappointed that you didn't dig that. I understand your reasons just a little bit more after having chatted to you about them for close to an hour. I suspect you want to get some revenge. What are we doing next?
Okay. So I tell you what, Rob, I would really like to say that the next one is, and I've gone on about it here, Boys for Pele by Tori Amos. And the thing that's stopping me a little bit is it shouldn't be that just because two people share a gender and an instrument that we lump them together. But I think there is if we'd never heard of Bob Dylan or Neil Young, and you pitched a Neil Young album to me, I might well pitch a Bob Dylan one back again, because I think there is enough.
Okay, we're going to be doing
there is a similarity.
We're going to be doing enough
there.
Groups of 4 or 5 white men playing guitars at each other. So sure, let's do it.
Okay, all right. So one of my top 5 albums, Tori Amos' Boys for Pele, will be the thing, and it is, I'm afraid, over 70 minutes long, the thing that you will be listening to a lot until we record.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to getting stuck in. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.